Most of you will know about the Declaration of Women's Sex-Based Rights, which is the declaration that is trying to defend women's sex-based rights. It's on womensdeclaration.com. If you haven't signed it, please do sign it and please share it, because we're trying to use it to lobby policymakers to get the message across. There's a donate button, so if you have any extra money or some spare money, or you can afford to donate to support the cause, that would be fantastic. And that's on womensdeclaration.com, and there's the donate button there. Thank you so much for your support, but most of all, thank you for coming and participating and being here. Can you say something about the situation on gender identity in your country?
In our legal documents, as far as I examined, there is no even word gender, neither in the constitution nor in the main laws. We cannot meet it. Maybe only in some concept of national policy related to issues like, for instance, anti-AIDS and HIV policy or something like that, where the word gender is mentioned. But mentioning guarantee of rights that are guaranteed on the basis of sex actually means nothing for women, as the biological women, sex treated not really well in Russia. So that's what is relates actually to sex and gender, I can say. So normally if we talk about national politics, about law, we cannot meet the word gender. The thing is that in anti-women policy of Russian government is it's a long story, and there is a long fight of women's rights NGO for the law on domestic violence, for instance. Actually, in 2017, President of Russia, Vladimir Putin, signed a law that decriminalized some issues related to domestic violence. It was put out of criminal law and put to the administrative kind of law. So in case, for instance, a husband beats his wife, he won't go to jail. He will be just charged a very small amount of money. And this amount of money comes as a tax or something like that to a government. So actually women left absolutely unprotected in their houses. And you can imagine that now, recently during the pandemic, situation is becoming worse and worse, as women are stuck in their houses, alone within their husbands, other members of family, etc.
Here in UK, we nearly got self-ID, fortunately just in time, thanks to all the campaigning of people like us and the numerous organisations that formed in the UK to fight this ridiculous movement. The government has parked the proposals for the moment, and we're hoping that that will be an end to it. The surprise was that it was not any of the left parties that saw through it. It was the party of the right, the Conservatives. And many religious organisations also were not keen on transgenderism. So for most of us, having leaned to the left all our lives, are now having to talk to people on the right. And that's causing some controversy here, because there are some organisations who have lifelong policies of never talking to people on the right of politics. But the main thing is, thank goodness, we don't have self-ID. We do have the major LGBT charity in the UK called Stonewall, who went ahead of the law, assumed it was all going to go through, which of course it didn't, and made lots of money working with organisations to help them to change their policies and to put policies in place that supported self-ID. They, unfortunately, are carrying on doing this because they're making lots of money out of it. And we've got an uphill task now to persuade everybody that self-ID never happened. The law does not support self-ID, and many organisations are going to look very silly and have to change their policies back again. you might like to know about a recent Medium article on medium.com posted by a trans activist. It's very illuminating into their tactics, the kind of tactics that all of us gender critical women have been on the wrong side of here. It advocated everything against people it calls TERFs, from violence to doxing, to reporting to your employers, to finding out your address and harassing you. We at Object were very early in on this issue back in 2016. We've had death threats. I've lost a job over it, and I know many other people who have as well. We're posting it on our website very shortly, not of course because we agree with it, but just to show the lengths to which trans activists encourage each other to go. Tactics of harassment and violence that we would never ever advocate against anybody, not even the worst criminal.
Just on May 15th, the Department of Education here, its Civil Rights Office, ruled that well, first of all, I need to go back to Connecticut. There are 3 or 4 high school girls in Connecticut, an East Coast state, that are suing because they're being forced to compete against males. Males are being allowed to be on the women's sports team. So they're suing, and the Department of Education decided that indeed that is a violation of what's called here Title IX, which means women's sports, protection for women's sports. So that's a huge victory, but it doesn't touch or affect the fact that the actual court in case. So it's going to go through the federal courts, and the federal court is not bound by what the Department of Education said about Title IX. So it still remains to be seen what's going to happen there. But there's a lot of pushback against this infiltration of men into women's sports. And that started in May. And then there was also a bill in Idaho, the first state to pass a bill, and Idaho is a Western state, the first state to pass a bill objecting and outlawing men coming into women's sports. And the ACLU then is now suing. The ACLU is the American Civil Liberties Union, and they are suing the state of Idaho on this because they support transgender athletes, quote unquote. And just like Jan said, it's the right, the conservatives that are doing the fight on this. Women's Liberation Front is also fighting for this, but it's the Alliance for Defending Freedom, which is a right-wing conservative organization, is the one that is bringing these lawsuits forward for the Connecticut girls in high school, and then also fighting now ACLU, which is trying to sue Idaho. And the ADF, the Alliance for Defending Freedom, is now bringing into that lawsuit 2 collegiate women who are protected by law in terms of sports, and to intervene in that lawsuit. So there's a whole lot going on, and a lot of it's very encouraging. It's starting to get some momentum going, I think. The other thing I wanted to just mention quickly is that I think it was a major victory that Women's Liberation Front was able to get their panel on the new feminist, the new misogyny into the Seattle Library, because there was that was in February, and there was a big to-do about that. And of course, the trans activists tried to get it canned, but the Seattle Library held strong. Now in the US, women are canceled all the time. They can't get venues for gender critical views, presentations, and the Seattle Library held strong and stood for intellectual freedom, and that was a major victory, I think. And I was able to be there, and it was thrilling to be there with 300 people and see this panel.
Okay, to start from trans ideology in Ukraine, I should start from basically what happened in Ukraine. So the situation here is pretty interesting. Our society is very traditional and conservative, and the majority of people are pretty aggressive to everything new or everything that goes against their religion, beliefs, and so on. And mostly, of course, it's just an excuse to torture someone or bully them. But we also, right now, we have a pretty strong LGBTQ+ community. The problem is, since 2014, it's Maidan, if you know what it is, We started a new pro-EU policy, which of course requires some social changes as well. And our government tries to mimic the EU society as much as they can, so we can be acknowledged as an equal country for joining. The problem then comes with this, these progressive views they try to implement, they not implement it at all. They copy Western agenda, but not shape it or form our own agenda so we can easily and naturally fit into our society. So here in Ukraine, we're basically solving Western problems, not our own. Like, for example, like racism towards Romani people that no one talks about, but we talk about Black people instead, which is important too, but not that important in our agenda because we have a very few Black people here. Concerning trans ideology, on the battlefield here are liberals and traditionalists, and if like 5-7 years ago their powers weren't equal, now they are. So traditionalists sit at the government, just living their life, organizing movements against women, LGBT, and basically everything not heterosexual or Ukrainian. One organization called Pravy Sector, they can be pretty aggressive, but there are some smaller ones. Politicians are traditionalists, but here's the catch. No matter how much they hate trans ideology, LGBT, etc., they simply don't have a place to express it. If they do, they won't be canceled, but they will be very criticized, especially with EU, and that's what they're afraid of. Our people, while praising liberal Western ideology, became blinded by it. So here goes the other camp, the liberal one. Basically, they swallow everything they feed them, everything. Like within 3 years, I can say the inner situation changed a lot. Like in the youth camp, you know. I used to work 3 years ago, I used to work in the LGBT community, and our communities in general were pretty okay with trans people, but never really focused on them. I personally knew just a couple of trans people here in Ukraine and maybe some media persons. 3 years passed and they completely changed their focus along with all the other communities. I'm not quite sure, and I can say I'm more than sure it's not their genuine position because our organization depends on funding. The majority of projects in Ukraine are sponsored by EU or USA or the most powerful LGBT organizations in Ukraine who are sponsored by EU or USA. So due to the pressure of those, they have to express a specific profitable position. With all this empty-headed propaganda, our people became brainwashed too. Simply just believing everything liberal can feed them without second guessing, and even if they do question something, there's no room to discuss it. In the liberal community, you'll be canceled, even though it's not possible to lose a job, for example, here because you're gender critical, more like if you're pro-trans or if you're trans-identified person. But anyways, lips are gonna eat you. Generally, the situation in Ukraine has always been about two camps, one pro-Russia, one pro-EU, one conservative, one liberal, and so on. So you either with one camp or another, no in between. That's the major problem here. So there are no visible experts who coherently expressing their views concerning gender criticism on TV, for example. But there are insane religious people screaming, swearing on poor, polite trans on TV. There are no aggressive fetishist men objectifying women, but there are progressive creative artists, you know. On the other side, traditionalists, as well as our politicians, are trying to do everything they can. So trans community and LGBT community and basically everybody else would have their rights only de jure, mimicking changes via media talks. Media, like mainstream media, is also sponsored by EU, USA, or by our politicians. And our fellow people are literally torturing neoliberals, on one hand making them vulnerable, but on the other even more powerful. Because those traditionalists, they also represent a critical position as if it's vehemently aggressive and dangerous. A variety of positions is pretty poor here. So people don't have much to choose from. Either you're a good European citizens who eats what liberal camp feeds you without questioning, because if you do question, that means you're not tolerant enough, basically phobic. Either you're a traditionalist who believes in God or whatever, and most likely you're pro-Russian and very aggressive. Either you're a patriot, nationalist, but you're also a sort of Nazi who burns Romani people's camps and tries to blow up gay clubs. Happened in my city, actually. Being critical means being phobic, in one sentence, in our media environment. Radfems in Ukraine are pretty invisible too, at least I know just a few. I'm personally not aware of much, like a big networks, Radfem networks in Ukraine. And there's a reason for that, that's security, which is completely understandable. I know just one very radical organization, they have women on their agenda, but they're not male free and they not only focus on women issues, so yeah.